The university building was almost empty when I found myself standing outside his office again. The hallway lights hummed softly, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Evening had settled in quietly, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel louder, pages turning, footsteps echoing, breath being held. I told myself I was there for academic reasons. I always did. I was a postgraduate student, old enough to know better, old enough to understand boundaries. He was my professor, respected, composed, and married. The rules were clear, and yet, something had already shifted long before that evening, something subtle, unspoken, dangerous. Inside the office, the air smelled faintly of old books and coffee. He sat behind his desk, glasses resting low on his nose, scanning through my research draft. His voice was calm, measured, professional. But when he looked up, his eyes lingered just a second longer than necessary. "Your ideas have depth," he said. "You think differently." Those words settled somewhere deeper than they should have. No one had noticed me like that before, not really. Not with that quiet intensity. I felt seen, not as a name on a register, but as a person with thoughts that mattered. And that realization frightened me as much as it thrilled me. Our conversations stretched beyond deadlines and citations. We spoke about ambition, about regret, about the pressure of becoming someone you once dreamed of being. I learned that his life, despite its structure, felt incomplete to him. He learned that mine, despite my freedom, felt directionless. I was aware of every detail, the way he paused before responding, the careful distance he kept, the way his tone softened when the conversation turned personal. Nothing physical happened, nothing inappropriate, and yet, something invisible had already crossed a line. Inside my head, a warning kept repeating, "This is wrong." But another voice, quieter and more persuasive, whispered back, "It's just conversation." As the clock ticked closer to night, the campus outside disappeared into darkness. The office light became our own small world, sealed off from consequences. When I stood to leave, our hands almost touched as he passed my folder back to me. Almost. That single moment sent a rush through me, heat, confusion, guilt all at once. I pulled my hand back quickly, pretending not to notice. He did the same, but the silence that followed was heavy, charged with everything we refused to say. At the door, I hesitated. "Thank you," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He nodded. "Be careful on your way home." I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with academics. As I walked away, I knew something had changed. Not visibly, not officially, but emotionally, the first boundary had already been crossed. And the most dangerous part was this: I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. Yet I also wasn't sure I could stay away. End of part 1. After that evening, I began to measure my days differently, not by lectures or deadlines, but by moments when our paths crossed. I told myself it was coincidence. The university was large, yet somehow we kept meeting in quiet corners, the library's upper floor, the faculty corridor after sunset, the courtyard when most students had already gone home. Each encounter felt accidental. None of them were. Our conversations grew longer, more deliberate. We spoke less about research and more about ourselves, carefully at first, then with growing ease. He asked about my childhood, my fears, the pressure I felt to succeed. I asked about his early career, the sacrifices he had made, the dreams he had quietly set aside. Still, there were rules. He never touched me, never raised his voice, never crossed a line that could be named. And yet, every word felt like a step deeper into something neither of us wanted to define. One evening, as rain tapped against the tall windows of the library, he said it, softly, almost reluctantly. "My wife wouldn't understand this part of me." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't need to. In that moment, I became aware of the truth we had both been avoiding. I was no longer just a student, and he was no longer just a teacher. We were two people sharing something private, something that didn't belong to anyone else. Guilt followed quickly, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I knew about his marriage now. I knew there was someone else, someone unseen, unheard, but very real. And still, when my phone lit up with a message from him asking about my work, my heart responded before my conscience could. This is emotional, not physical, I told myself. No one is being hurt. But the secrecy itself was already a betrayal. We began meeting only in places where no one would ask questions. Empty classrooms. Office hours stretched late into the evening. Our voices stayed low, our distance carefully measured. Faceless moments, hands wrapped around coffee cups, eyes fixed on pages while thoughts drifted elsewhere. Sometimes, our conversations stopped abruptly, as if we had both realized how far we were leaning in. In those pauses, I could feel his restraint, his fear. And I wondered if mine was any stronger. One night, as I gathered my notes to leave, he spoke my name in a way that made me freeze. "This can't go on," he said. I nodded, relief and disappointment colliding in my chest. I agreed too quickly, as if saying the words might make them true. But the next day, another message arrived. And the day after that, another conversation began. Promises dissolved quietly, without confrontation. We were no longer pretending it was harmless. We were simply pretending we were in control. And somewhere between unread emails and half-finished sentences, I realized the truth I was most afraid to admit. Even without touch, even without confession, I had already become part of a secret that could ruin us both. End of part 2. The shift was subtle at first. An unanswered message, a delayed reply, a meeting cancelled without explanation. I noticed everything. When you live inside a secret, even silence speaks loudly. The university no longer felt safe. Every hallway seemed narrower, every passing glance heavier. I caught fragments of conversation that made my stomach tighten, whispers that stopped when I approached, questions disguised as jokes. Nothing had been said aloud, but suspicion had begun to breathe. He changed too. In public, he became distant, formal, almost cold. In private, when we did speak, his words were careful, restrained, as if he were constantly measuring the cost of each sentence. The warmth that once filled our conversations was replaced by tension, by fear. "I can't risk this," he said one evening, standing near his office door but not inviting me inside. I nodded, pretending I understood. Pretending it didn't hurt. That night, guilt finally caught up with me. I thought of his wife, someone I had never met but now carried in my conscience. I wondered how easily a life could fracture without a single touch ever taking place. The realization was unsettling. Emotional betrayal left no visible marks, yet it cut just as deeply. I began questioning my own role. Had I mistaken attention for affection? Had I allowed admiration to turn into dependency? The power imbalance I had once ignored now felt impossible to escape. He had authority, experience, a life already built. I had hope, ambition, and far more to lose than I had admitted. Still, when days passed without hearing from him, the absence felt unbearable. One afternoon, I found myself outside his office again, just as I had in the beginning. This time, the door remained closed. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the quiet, feeling foolish and exposed. Later that week, we crossed paths unexpectedly in the faculty corridor. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes held regret, real, unmistakable. Mine held questions he couldn't answer. "This has to stop," he said quietly. Not as a suggestion, as a decision. I wanted to argue, to explain, to remind him of the connection we had built. But I saw it then. The fear of consequences, the weight of responsibility, the life waiting for him outside these walls. I stepped back. "Goodbye," I said. The word felt heavier than any confession. Walking away didn't bring relief. It brought emptiness, the kind that lingers long after the choice has been made. I carried the shame, the longing, the unanswered what-ifs with me through every lecture, every assignment, every late night alone. The affair had never been physical. Yet it had changed me in ways I couldn't undo. And as the semester moved forward, one truth became painfully clear. Some choices don't end a story, they haunt it. End of part 3. Time passed the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. The semester ended. My research moved forward. From the outside, my life appeared unchanged. Inside, everything felt rearranged, as if a room had been emptied but the echo remained. I avoided the places we used to sit. The library's upper floor, the long corridor near his office. Even familiar spaces carried memories I didn't ask for. I learned how to look through people instead of at them, how to keep my thoughts carefully contained. I heard things, eventually. That he was still married. That his career was intact. That life, for him, had returned to its expected shape. I told myself that was how it should be. Consequences, after all, rarely distribute themselves evenly. For me, the lesson arrived slowly. I became more cautious, more guarded. I stopped mistaking attention for connection, approval for intimacy. The experience left a mark, not visible, but permanent. I learned that silence could be louder than words, and restraint could hurt more than rejection. One afternoon, long after I thought I had moved on, I saw him again. We were both waiting at a crosswalk near the campus entrance. No office doors, no books, no excuses to hide behind. He looked older somehow, or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly now. Our eyes met briefly. No greeting, no apology, no explanation, just recognition. The light changed. People moved around us, unaware of the history passing silently between two strangers. Before crossing, he hesitated, as if he might speak. I felt the same pull, the same old ache. But neither of us did. I walked in one direction. He went in the other. As I continued forward, I realized something I hadn't understood before. What we shared had never been love. It was timing, loneliness, and the dangerous comfort of being understood by the wrong person. Still, it mattered, not because it was right, but because it taught me where my boundaries truly were, and how easily they could blur if left unguarded. That night, alone in my room, I opened my journal and wrote a single line. Some connections exist only to show us who we must not become. I closed the book and turned off the light. The story didn't end with regret or reconciliation. It ended with awareness, and a question that lingered in the quiet long after everything else faded. If silence had saved us, why did it still hurt so much? End of part 4.